All right, new cards to review, including this crazy dual class legendary for Shaman and Mage, a bunch of other legendaries, my card reveal, just lots to get into.
Hey, buddy, watch this.
All right, so let's start things off here with Lore Keeper Polkelt. That's my card reveal. And I talked in great detail about this one on my card reveal. So I'm not going to go into so much functional detail here, but essentially, I think this card's really, really strong because it can be played in a variety of ways, which means a lot of decks are going to be able to find a home for it. So first off, I think is combo decks, drawing into your high cost combo piece. Think of those Malagoses. Maybe think of some Alexstrasza stuff. In wild format, people have talked about like Shirvala, etc. So, whether that's an old deck like Holy Wrath Paladin, a current deck like Malagos Quest Warlock, or future decks that are also using high cost cards, Polkelt makes sense there. And then we've also got just like Highlander decks or any kind of mid-range deck with a great curve where you're looking for some big late game bombs. You play this maybe like turn 6, 7, 8. You start drawing big 10 drop, big 9 drop, big 8 drop, etc. to help you close out games, moving all of your weaker card draws to the bottom of your deck. And then finally, is I think actually aggro decks can use this really, really well. Just making sure they find their big finisher cards, those like 5 drops, 4 drop, maybe some burst damage pieces. Instead of drawing it all into all the 1 drops, they have to run as an aggro deck to get things flowing. So between those 3, it seems like it's really quite gonna be quite powerful. Now there are some downsides, of course. It's not necessarily great to move low cost things to the bottom of your deck. If you need spells to go with Malagos, that's a problem. Sometimes you need flexibility from a mana cost standpoint, so having like a 2 drop and an 8 drop to play together can be awesome. Only having an 8 drop can be a limitation. So it's not like a perfect card, but it's a really, really good one that I think is going to be impactful and important. So still a very, very powerful card I was quite happy to reveal. All right, up next is Frostwhisper here. Really cool, some pun intended, Shaman and Mage legendary card. 5 mana, 3/6. At the end of your turn, deal 1 damage to all enemies, not just enemy minions, but enemies. So this goes face, and that's improved by spell damage. So this reminds me a lot at first glance of Despicable Dreadlord. You might remember that old Warlock card that dealt damage to enemy minions, but this, again, goes face. A little bit higher health total, lower attack, but that's fine. And this spell damage upside is really quite cool. Oh my god, I keep saying cool with the Frostwhisper card. Deal with it. And I think that's great for both of these classes, honestly. So even at a base level, this card's probably fine in many cases. You'd probably prefer it to 2 at a base because a lot of minions have 2, but we are still in this lackey world where there's a lot of 1 health stuff floating around. So I think there will be instances where you play this on 5 with no spell damage upside, and you're pretty happy that it cleared some lackeys, it softened up your opponent's board, and you're getting a 3/6 mini to help you take future trades. If it lives, you can go absolutely crazy with it on a future turn. All of that sounds just fine. And then if you can bundle in any sort of spell damage to go alongside this, that's really cool, because dealing 2 to all enemies, that's a nice little board clear in many cases. Dealing 3 is crazy, and a little bit of chip damage here and there is great for both classes like Shaman and Mage that do have ways to find follow-up damage and end games via burst damage. So for me, this just does so many things really well, whether it's just a totem from Shaman or a small spell damage card you toss in that has maybe some additional upside. Think like Blood Mage Thalnos, for instance. You're happy to draw a card, boost your Frostwhisper. You can use that spell damage for other things as well. It's just a nice little utility card. Is this one going to outright be something you build around and it wins you games? I doubt it, because it's really hard to invest that much in a single minion. You do have to spend additional mana on all those spell damage supports for this one. So I don't think it's going to be the game winner, the game defining card, but as a useful piece of the puzzle for both of these classes that you're very happy to play on many occasions, that sometimes high rolls into the nuts thanks to some spell damage inclusions in your deck or totems or whatever it is. Sure, Frostwhisper looks great. This feels like one of those cards where you kind of can't go wrong. It's got that really high floor and the occasional big ceiling too for some just bonkers plays. So all in all, I think this is a great one for both classes. Moving on here to another dual class card, the Groundskeeper. For Druid and Shaman, it's a 4 mana 4/5 with Taunt. So nice little defensive body. We've seen, particularly with things like Shield of Galakron, how relevant that 4/5 taunt can be in the mid game. And this one's even cheaper at 4 mana, which is nice. And it's also got this cool battle cry. If you're holding a spell that costs 5 or more, you can restore 5 health as well. So this big spell synergy support we've seen with things like Steel Beetle currently in standard format, but accessible to both Shaman and Druid. And both of those can use big spells pretty well. If you think about like Quest Root, for instance, it's got quite a few spells that are more than 5 between the Starfalls and the Hidden Oases and the Nourishes. And then Shaman can run a big spell removal package, Hag of the Scheme and Earthquake, and can even go big spells with things like Eye of the Storm. So you could definitely see where this fits into those decks. They're typically more defensive, slower stall styles, and Groundskeeper would be a great minion to put into those to help you really mitigate some of that early pressure. Now, that said, this does have a tighter restriction on the kinds of decks it's going to fit into. It can't go into anything all that successfully. Nobody's going to run this without the Battle Cry. It does sometimes low roll if you don't happen to have one of those big spells in hand. So it's by no means like this ultimate hyper defensive heal card that I want it to be. It does have some checks in place here. And, the odds of one of those decks becoming really meta relevant is somewhat limited. I think it's possible that Quest Druid makes a comeback. I think Big Shaman could be a fringe meta deck. I don't expect any of them to be like tier 1 sorts of things. I don't think this card helps push them in that direction. It would be more of a nice complementary support piece. So a really solid card, a totally okay card that feels great to play, but it's not one that's going to be a hugely impactful meta card as far as I can tell. So next up here is the Sphere of Sapience, a 1 mana 0/4 neutral weapon. First ever neutral weapon that's collectible. And it reads, at the start of your turn, look at your top card. You can put it on the bottom and lose 1 durability. So essentially how this works is before you draw your card, you're going to see the card you were going to draw, and you're going to get another option that says, like, I don't want this, put it on the bottom of the deck. So you get to choose, keep the card or put it on the bottom. If you put it on the bottom, then you're going to lose a durability. So up to 4 times you can choose to put a card on the bottom. This happens once per turn at the start of your turn from your natural card draw, not on any other follow-up card draw you might have within a turn. So essentially this is kind of like the scry mechanic for Magic the Gathering. I'm told, at least. I'm not a big Magic player. And I guess that's a pretty popular / important mechanic in Magic. And a lot of people are really, really excited about this card. I am personally not as excited, which there's always like 1 or 2 cards where I go against the grain with you guys and the community at large. And I'll explain why for this one. Essentially, well, let's talk about Magic first. In Magic the Gathering, you have all these land cards that you have to draw for mana, but I guess later in the game, lands are not the sort of things you want to top deck. You want to top deck meaningful, meaty cards. So the average distance or of quality sort of between the worst draw and the best draw in Magic is, I think, notably higher because of that land versus normal card aspect. I don't think that distance is nearly so large in Hearthstone. There are certainly differences between like a 1-drop and a 10-drop, and you'd often much rather have the higher cost, higher impact sort of thing. But there's not like totally whiff dead draws in Hearthstone like there might be in Magic the Gathering. So scrying those away or sphering those away, to me, doesn't seem as important. Still valuable, of course, because if you need like, a specific removal card, if you really desperately need, Soul Mirror, and you draw Disciple of Galakron instead, like, get rid of that Disciple. I need another chance here to hit my Soul Mirror. That's cool. So I guess I should say, I don't think this card's terrible by any means. I just don't think it's like this 5-star home run, put in every deck kind of card that a lot of people seem to think, at least from what I've read about this one. It's always the trap of reviewing these a little later as I get to read community opinion. So essentially here, my challenge is, there's not that much difference between, best and worst case scenario in Hearthstone. Some difference clearly, but not as much maybe as Magic. And beyond that, you're actually giving up a card with the Sphere of Sapience. So it's kind of, this could just be the Soul Mirror, or it could be some other AoE or some other useful tool that you include in your deck instead of the Sphere itself. So you're already kind of trading away one of the upsides here of the 4 total scry upsides by drawing the card itself. And you could just, include more card draw, which would also help you find more choices as well. So by running this, it's already limiting itself just a little, right? That said, if you have, spare cards in hand, if your deck's got plenty of stuff rolling around, it might be okay to just take a little bit of a hit now for that continued upside in the future of trying to find something specific, whether that be a combo piece or whether that be big AoE or a big threat, whatever it is. This can help you narrow down to those nice, specific desired cards. And that's really the scenario where I think you're going to run this one most. But I just don't think it's got that like crazy high upside because it's self-limiting. Card draw does the same thing in a lot of ways, and I'd almost just rather have a card draw card instead. Plus, if your deck's drawing a lot of cards already, this loses a little bit of relevance because you're more likely to find things regardless and more likely to have choices. Same if your deck's generating a lot of cards, you're likely to have a lot of choices anyway, so maybe finding a slightly better choice off your draw isn't that valuable. This also has a limitation for weapon classes where they're not going to want to sit on this weapon for a long time, just waiting because they want to play like big attack weapons and do other things, right? They want live wire lances and true silver champions, etc. Kills the hero power for rogue, perhaps. So it right out the gate limits itself in a handful of different ways. Maybe not so great in classes or decks that can draw a ton or generate a ton. Not great in classes that want to run weapons or even attacks, because the attacks will also use up the durability of this one without adding anything incrementally. So it's like 75-80% of the game is already restricted for Sphere of Sapience for me. And then even in the remaining, I think you have to have a very specific combo card you're playing towards, something where it's really, really important for you to find the exact card you need in your deck. Otherwise, I just don't think this offers enough upside, because slightly better draws from time to time is not really worth the time it takes, because this takes 4 turns to pay itself off. And yes, 1 mana is not much of a commitment there, but a card is a big commitment, because that's something you drew, you lost access. There's opportunity cost to what this would have been instead. It could have been removal, card draw, a threat, etc. So the opportunity cost of running this in your deck, the delay at which it operates, the limitations it has for class/archetype really restrict this card to me. I don't see how more than like 1 or 2 decks would ever run this successfully. Maybe something like a Control Priest or a very specific combo deck. Beyond that, I just don't see it making its way into anything at all. So, it's still playable. Like I said, there are a couple worlds for it, but it's not, to me, anywhere close to like a 5-star card. This feels very much like a true 3-star card. So moving on here to Vectus, a new 5-mana 4/4 neutral legendary. With a battle cry, summon 2 1/1 whelps, and then each of those whelps will gain a death rattle from your minions that died this game. So really cool little mid-game threat card here that's going to play nicely off of death rattle synergies. And it's quite a bit of a little stat bomb. 3 bodies is often difficult to deal with, and if those death rattles have big upsides, clearly this can be a really impactful play. And the cool thing is you really only have to play like 1 death rattle. The whelps will take that death rattle, and that's fine. So you don't even necessarily have to build your deck like super death rattly to take advantage of this one. You want to make sure you have already drawn and played a death rattle. So you need a handful for sure, but it doesn't have to be a fully committed death rattle build. And in particular, with all the prime cards we got in Ashes of Outland, I think there's a lot of natural fits for this. I could easily see this going into Druid with an Archspore Mishafin. That would be pretty amazing. Warrior with Kargath would be really cool. Maybe even some Rogue Death Rattle stuff with a Kama or whatever else would be really nice for Vectus. Imagine all the Solarian primes you could get off this in a Highlander Mage. I think that's actually pretty sick too. So that's a natural fit for every class already. I mean, not all the primes are necessarily great, and not every prime is utilized in a way that would be good in a minion-based mid-rangey deck that Vectus would fit, but nonetheless, a lot of places to put this one. Beyond that, I think you could maybe just use this with like Loot Hoarders and use it as a card draw card that's still playing towards the board and contesting your opponent's stuff just fine. So yeah, at the end of the day, Vectus looks like a strong card. Just dump a pile of stats, you get some upsides. There may be even stronger, crazier things you could do with the death rattles. We've seen those like mechanical whelp styles of old where this could just summon a giant pile of stats. It can play towards late game value. It can be card draw, and the numbers all line up for this one. I think whether it's Highlander decks or or not, just some kind of death rattle deck. It could fit in the top end of a zoo deck. It doesn't matter. Vectus does something pretty cool. So this looks like a really safe, strong card. Next up here is Wandmaker, a 2-mana 2/2 battle cry. Add a 1-cost spell from your class to your hand. So it's a tiny Cobalt Spellkin. It's half the battle cry effect and like less than half the stats and cost. So if you like what Cobalt Spellkin's doing, then Wandmaker could do more of that. And Cobalt Spellkin's been a card that's certainly popped in to a handful of decks, whether that's because of Dragon Synergies or a class that's looking to utilize a lot of 1-mana spells, like Demon Hunter with Twin Slice is now pretty cool. Wandmaker could be a way to get even more Twin Slices added to your deck at a pretty low cost. So yeah, this card's totally fine. It's not something you're going to lose your mind over and have to include in your deck list. But if it wants to pop into a list here and there, I could imagine, a more control-oriented late game Highlander deck like, say, Mage, using this to generate some additional resources, help fill in the curve in those early games, create a little speed bump for your opponents with a 2/2 body. That 1-mana spell can turn into more cool stuff, whether that's Ray of Frost, Arcane Missiles, and it's a totally fine card. Now, I will say, as we get further and further into a standard format rotation, it's harder for cards like these to find their way into Highlander decks because there's a lot of stuff to choose from at that stage. So not everybody's going to line up on this one. It's not going to pop its way into every deck, but it's certainly good enough and completely fine. So will it make its way into a list? Sure, it absolutely could. All right, next up here, Secret Passage. Really cool card for Rogue. 1-mana spell. Replace your hand with 5 cards from your deck and then swap it back next turn. So pretty neat little card draw utility here, essentially, with Secret Passage. I think at its greatest use case, it's when you've played a really quick game, you're low on resources, maybe you're an aggro deck, face deck that's pushing really hard, and you need that kind of final oomph to get over the hill and push for lethal, kind of like what we saw with Myra's Unstable Element in the past with Rogue. You can use this to trade your empty hand or mostly empty hand in for 5 cards from your deck, which is going to be a huge infusion of stuff. Help you find a couple Eviscerates, that Cold Blood, a charging minion to end the game. And it won't matter if it swaps back to an empty hand next turn because the game will be over. And frankly, even if you don't end the game, but you just find a couple minions to play and some threats to dump on board to help maintain another layer of pressure, that's a great in a pinch infusion of cards that you wouldn't otherwise have. So you've bought yourself another turn or two, then you swap back to an empty-ish hand and you're right back where you were. So all is good. You gained this enormous upside really without much penalty, and that's great news. Now, beyond that, you could also use this where you actually have a hand full of stuff. Maybe you have 5+ cards in hand already, but they're not the cards you want. You're looking for something really specific out of your deck, whether that's some, powerful legendary that's going to set up your game plan. Think about like a Prince kel'thuzad of old, where you're just really trying to find Prince kel'thuzad, something of that nature, or maybe just something to react to the current board state. You can swap in the hand you've got that's not very good, take a gander at what the random stuff out of your deck is, because it's going to be new stuff. This is not like Plot Twist where you shuffle in and you pull out. It's totally going to be different cards minus any duplicates you might be running. So it just gives you a chance to kind of mulligan your hand and see what other options exist. Use those cards in a pinch. Okay, I found the removal card. I'm going to remove this minion. I'm really happy I made it through this turn successfully. Then you get your old hand back for the next turn as well. So it's really cool in the way this just gives you a reroll on your hand to find exactly what you need, or sometimes to just draw cards temporarily to help end games or buy you time. So this looks absolutely amazing to me. I feel like this card's super strong. I can imagine it not only in fast rogue decks, but maybe even in other rogue decks as well. Just find that Galakron, find that Kronks that's hiding in your deck, even if just for a turn. That's okay. Swap it in, use it, and then swap back, and you're just fine. So it's a really, really cool card, and it seems really, really good too. All right, next up here, let's talk about Star Student Stelina, a Demon Hunter legendary card. 4 mana, 4/3. Outcast. Look at 3 cards in your opponent's hand and shuffle one of them into their deck. So another disruption card here for Demon Hunter, definitely becoming a theme. in Scholomance Academy so far. A little bit worried about community reception there since Demon Hunter's already got a little bit of a bad rap and is causing some problems with the community opinion. This might be frustrating to play against, so I feel that. But here's my take on this card. I actually think it kind of sucks. I've seen some positive reactions to this one. This is, again, maybe going to be the review where I go against general opinion, but I don't think Stelina is very good at all. So here's the goal, right? Here's how the dream use case for this is: you play this and your opponent has some awesome card in their hand and you're so happy because you shuffle that card back into their deck. You get rid of their Malygos, so their big AoE removal or whatever thing they care about. And it's like, yes, I did it. I stalled them out. I delayed them and I'm going to win the game now. And that's the dream scenario. But my question is, how often does that really happen? Because if your opponent has 8-9 cards in hand as a combo deck or as a control deck might often have, you're not even going to hit the Malygos that often. Like 1 out of 3 times, you're even going to hit the card you care about in the Discover of 3. It's not going to show up. And then you're going to have to choose between like 3 just random low-cost, garbage, useless cards, and you're going to shuffle one back into the deck and be like, yeah, okay, well, that kind of sucked. That wasn't very good at all. And what did you do in the meantime? You paid way too much mana for a 4/3 in a class that can probably do way better things with their mana. We've seen Demon Hunter do so many faster things. I mean, even if you're pretending that Demon Hunter in the future, which is totally possible, is this like control disruption class that's all about stalling and just ruining your opponent's game plan, and they play the long game like that instead of the kind of tempo aggro stuff we've seen so far, even in that world, it's still not that likely for Stelina to make much of an impact. And you're not even really destroying the card permanently. So if you do get rid of their like Malygos, you still have to start ending the game, or they're just going to draw the Malygos again and get right back to it. It's just getting shuffled back into their deck, which, you know, if you are ending the game, that's great. That's functionally as good as destroying it, but then you're playing probably a faster, higher pressure Demon Hunter. And then again, you're sacrificing 4 mana and most of your turn probably for a card that fails a large portion of the time. And then, not to mention on top of all that, this card is only good on Outcast, which is, I think, a ginormous restriction most people are overlooking because it's a 4 mana card. This one's not going to be that easy to move into an Outcast position. Plus, if you're looking to use it at a key moment or anything else, it might be parked in that Outcast position, like on the left side of the hand for a long time, denying any other future Outcast cards. So you've got this skull that's sitting there and it's like, oh, okay, I guess I'm playing Stelina here in the mid game. I have no idea if it's going to do anything good. It probably won't do anything good, and then you've sort of wasted your 4 mana turn. So to me, between the cost inefficiency of this card, between the Outcast lock, between the fact that it doesn't even really do anything like 70% of the time probably, and even when it does do something that remaining 30% of the time, it's not necessarily a game-ending significance in what it does. I just don't actually know why people are so pumped about this one. I get it in the best case scenarios exactly, but otherwise, I don't know. Maybe I'm actually aiming too big for what this card's supposed to do. Maybe you're just happy that it takes any card out of their hand. Maybe you're playing against aggro and they have just Dino Tamer Brand and you're shuffling Brand back into their deck, and that's the use case. But then I still feel bad that I've played a 4 mana 4/3 in Demon Hunter who can do so much more with that much mana. Demon Hunter can do crazy things with any amount of mana. The committing and super understated minion like this, I just don't know if it's worth it. So even in the worlds where I play for a smaller impact, which is not always what you want to do, I still don't see where Stelina shines. So for me, this card just looks really weak. I just don't see why you'd run this over so many other options. It seems limited, awkward, low impact in a lot of ways, and more punishing for you than your opponent. It's like, yeah, I'm going to give my opponent a weak turn, but first I'm going to take a super weak turn. I don't think that makes a lot of sense in a class like Demon Hunter as we've seen it yet. So for me, Star Student Stelina is absolutely not a Star Student at all. I think she's failing the course. So next up here is Mage Hunter, a Demon Hunter minion. It's a 3 mana 2/3 with Rush, another disruption style card, because whenever this attacks a minion, it silences it. So we've got a big upgrade here to your Iron Beak Owl, another minion in the vein of that kind of silence like a Spellbreaker. And we know that, Spellbreaker was a great card. It got Hall of Fame. We know Iron Beak Owl has been a good card in the past as well. Silences are good, particularly for aggressive decks like Demon Hunter that might need to occasionally push through a taunt minion to go face. Kayn has served that purpose so far, but it might not hurt to have some extra utility with something like Mage Hunter. Also, this is like the natural Edwin Van Cleef counter. You attack Edwin, he's a 10-10, boom, he goes down to 2-2, and this takes a nice little value trade, which, Edwin's not everywhere, but don't underestimate how impactful that could be as a swing option. I think it's more likely just hitting, taunts or death rattles in the early game. Even like clearing out a poisonous against Hunter. These sorts of small little impacts this card could make are important and meaningful. Clearing out some Librams early, right? All these things go a long way with Mage Hunter. And of course, as a 2-3 with Rush, it's way better than like Spellbreaker or Iron Beak Owl or those sorts of cards at reacting to the board, because it can trade into stuff and still be useful even if you're not using the silence aspect. So this card does a lot of things really well. It does have some downsides in that you can't like silence something behind a taunt. So if they got some really crazy Libram and a taunt protecting it, this can't get through like a Spellbreaker could, since it's not targeted. But I think that's less important and meaningful than the fact that this has so much additional upside with that nice stat, with the ability to value trade with Rush. All of those things are pretty important. The question is just, will Demon Hunter have better ways to deal with things? Would they rather just push through with a weapon? Is Kayn satisfactory when it comes to clearing taunts out of the way for those face pushes? In other words, will this be able to push its way into a Demon Hunter deck that already does things so exceedingly well? And how often will this be kind of dead on turn 3 when you'd rather play like more pressure and more threats because you've dictated the pace of the game early so much as Demon Hunter that you don't need a card like this that's a little bit more swingy and a little bit more reactionary. It just depends how decks are constructed and how the meta looks. So I think there will be scenarios where this gets left out, and I think there will absolutely be scenarios in metas where this one makes a lot of sense as well, and it becomes an important card for Demon Hunter. That said, I think this card's pretty strong. Lorekeeper Polkelt is a 5-star card. Raz Frostwhisper is a 4-star card. Groundskeeper is a 3-star card. Sphere of Sapience is a 3-star card. Vectus is a 4-star card. Wandmaker is a 3-star card. Secret Passage is a 4-star card. Star Student Stelina is a 2-star card. Mage Hunter is a 4-star card. And there you go, folks. That wraps it up for, I think this is review number 8. Maybe a couple hot takes in this one. That said, share your thoughts. Tell me why I'm wrong. I love hearing your guys' take on all these cards. I'm curious to hear your counterpoints and your agreements as well on occasion when they hit. Who knows what's going to happen when the expansion actually hits. Excited to try all these. I think we get some really cool dual class cards in particular. So share your thoughts. Thanks much for watching. Subscribe if you're enjoying this stuff, I guess. And until next time, game on.